By the time the car pulled away from the terminal, Adaze's Nwosu had already decided she wasn't going to say a word about what happened inside. Not to her assistant, not to her board, not to anyone. She sat in the back seat with her carry-on on her lap, the old gray duffel she'd carried since her first trade show in 2009, the one with the broken zipper she'd fixed with a safety pin. And she watched the airport disappear behind her through rain-streaked glass. Her face was still. Her hands were folded. Anyone looking at her through the window would have assumed she was tired. Just a woman heading home after a long trip. They would have been right about the tired part. What they wouldn't have seen, what nobody in that lobby had seen, not until it was far too late, was what was sitting beneath that stillness. What had been sitting there, quietly, for 51 years. The lobby of the Pemberton Grand had been full that Thursday afternoon. A conference had just wrapped up on the 14th floor. Something in financial tech, 400 attendees. And the elevator banks were moving steadily, disgorging men in suits with lanyards still around their necks. Women in blazers checking phones. Clusters of people saying the kind of goodbyes that sound important but mean nothing. Adaeze came through the revolving door at 3:47 p.m. She was wearing a navy rain jacket, the kind that folds into its own pocket, dark jeans, and white sneakers. Her hair was natural, pulled back loosely. She had no luggage beyond the duffel. She was booked into a suite on the 22nd floor and had a dinner reservation at 7. She walked to the front desk. The man standing behind it was named Marcus. He was 26, 8 months into this job, and he had been having a good shift until he looked up and saw her. Not because there was anything wrong with her, but because of the 3 couples he'd just checked in. Resort wear, matching luggage sets, the kind of easy confidence that comes from never having to wonder if you belong somewhere. And the way his brain, without his permission, drew a comparison that it had no business drawing. He hesitated. It was barely a second. The kind of hesitation most people never notice. Adaeze noticed. She set her duffel on the counter and gave him her name. He typed it, looked at the screen, looked back at her. Then, with the careful politeness of someone who thought he was being professional, he said, "I'm going to need to verify this booking. Do you have the credit card used to make the reservation?" She handed it to him. Black card, no numbers on the front. He held it for a moment longer than necessary. And a piece of ID. She handed that over too. She had done this before. She would do it again. She was 51 years old, and she had been doing this, in one form or another, her entire adult life, producing evidence of herself in places that had already decided, before she opened her mouth, that she probably didn't belong there. She didn't say any of this. She waited. Marcus processed the card. The reservation came up. Suite 2204. 2 nights. Corporate rate, VIP flag, booked through an account registered to Nwosu Capital Group. He looked at the screen for a moment. Then he looked at her again. "I'll need a manager's approval for this rate," he said. Behind her, a man in a gray suit stepped up to the adjacent check-in position. He was checked in within 90 seconds. No ID, no second card, no manager. Adaeze watched this without turning her head. The manager who came was named Brendan. He was 43, had been with the Pemberton for 11 years, and he carried himself with the particular authority of someone who had confused familiarity with wisdom. He looked at the screen. He looked at Adaeze. He asked her, in a voice pitched just low enough to seem discreet, where she was traveling from. She told him. He asked the purpose of her stay. She told him that too. He asked. And this was the moment, the one she would think about later, the one that would stay with her longer than anything else that happened that afternoon. Whether she had a corporate contact he could call to verify the booking. She was the corporate contact. She was the corporation. She had founded it in her kitchen in Scarborough 22 years ago, with $11,000 and a laptop that overheated if you left it plugged in too long. She did not say this. What she said was, "Room 2204. My name is on the account. I've given you the card and the ID. Is there something else you need from me?" Brendan looked at her for a long moment. Then he said, "Mrs. Nwosu, I don't think this hotel is the right fit for what you're looking for. The lobby was not quiet. There were hundreds of people in it. But something about the way he said it, the steadiness of it, the absolute lack of embarrassment, made it feel like the two of them were the only people in the room. He was asking her to leave. Not in those words, but in every word he had said, he was asking her to leave. Adaeze looked at him for exactly as long as it took her to decide. Then she picked up her duffel, put the strap over her shoulder, and walked back to the revolving door. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't take out her phone. She didn't ask to speak to anyone else. She simply left. And that, Brendan would later tell the investigators, was when he should have known something was wrong. Not because she made a scene, because she didn't. The dinner reservation she canceled herself, from the car, in 2 sentences. The call she made after that was longer. She spoke to a woman named Rochelle, who had been her chief of staff for 9 years, and who understood, from the tone of Adaeze's voice, that something had happened that did not need to be discussed at length right now, but would need to be addressed with precision later. Pull everything we have with the Pemberton Group, Adaeze said. All of it. The conference contracts, the block bookings, the preferred vendor agreement. I want the total. Rochelle was quiet for 3 seconds. The total across all properties? Everything. There was the sound of keystrokes. Give me 20 minutes. Adaeze looked out the window. The rain had started properly now, the kind that makes the city look like a different version of itself. She had grown up 40 minutes east of where she was sitting, in a house where the basement flooded every spring, and her mother kept a stack of towels by the back door from March to May. She had worked her first job at 15, stocking shelves at a pharmacy in Scarborough, and she had been told by her manager on her second week that she should smile more because it would make the customers feel more comfortable. She was 51 years old, and she had more money than she would be able to spend in 3 lifetimes, and she was still being asked to prove she belonged in rooms. She was so tired of it. Not the anger kind of tired, the other kind. The deep, structural fatigue of a person who has been patient, strategically, deliberately, relentlessly patient, for decades, and who has learned that patience is not the same as peace. Rochelle called back in 18 minutes. Across all Pemberton Group properties, the hotel bookings, the annual leadership summit we host there, the venue contracts for the technology forums, the catering agreements. We're looking at just under $4.3 million annually. Adaeze absorbed this, and the Pemberton Grand specifically, about a third of that. Maybe slightly more. Send termination notices on all of it. Standard 30-day clause. I want it done tonight. Rochelle, who had worked for Adaeze long enough to know better than to ask if she was sure, said only, done. The second call Adaeze made was to a woman named Dr. Fatima Asante, who sat on 3 corporate boards, and whose opinion was quoted in the Globe and Mail with enough regularity that hotel managers in Toronto knew her name. Adaeze described what had happened in the lobby of the Pemberton Grand in the same flat, factual tone she used to describe quarterly earnings. No embellishment, no editorial, just the sequence of events. Dr. Asante was quiet for a moment after she finished. Then she said, "How do you want to handle it?" "I don't want to handle it," Adaeze said. "I want people to know what happened." The third call went to her friend Kofi Mensah, who was a partner at a Bay Street firm, and who had, over the past decade, referred more corporate clients to the Pemberton Group than he could count off the top of his head. He listened without interrupting. When she was done, he said, "I'll make some calls." She didn't ask him what calls. She didn't need to. That was the thing about having spent 22 years building something real. You didn't have to explain everything. The people who had watched you do it already understood the stakes. By 9 o'clock that evening, 6 people had quietly moved their bookings out of the Pemberton Grand. By midnight, it was 14. By 6 in the morning, before the breakfast service had started on the 14th floor, before the conference rooms had been reset, before Brendan had arrived for his shift, the cancellations had reached 23, representing just under $1.5 million in upcoming reservations. A technology summit that had been scheduled for October. 2 corporate retreats. A gala dinner that had been in the planning stages for 4 months. None of them cited a reason. They didn't need to. In the world Adaeze Nwosu moved through, people didn't need reasons explained to them. Things happened, and people responded, and the pattern was visible to anyone paying attention. The Pemberton Group's communications director, a woman named Sandra, arrived at her desk at 8:15 to find 47 emails she hadn't gone to bed with. By 8:30, she had identified the common thread running through all of them. By 9, she was on the phone with the general manager. By 9:15, the general manager was on the phone with the ownership group. The word Adaeze Nwosu's name had started appearing in their inboxes. Marcus had known, from the moment his shift started, that something was different about that morning. The front desk had a particular kind of quiet that wasn't peaceful. It was the quiet of people who knew something and were waiting to see what happened next. He found out at 10:15 when Sandra came to find him. She was careful, in the way HR people learn to be careful. Professional, documented, thorough. She walked him through what she knew. The timeline, the guest, the subsequent cancellations, the name Nwosu Capital Group, which Marcus had not recognized when it appeared on his screen the previous afternoon, but which he was now looking at on Sandra's tablet, alongside a profile that included a net worth estimate, a list of board memberships, and a photograph that matched exactly the woman he had asked to leave. He read it twice. She founded it, he said. 22 years ago, Sandra said. She's been named to the Forbes list 6 times. She's on the advisory board of 2 Canadian banks. Marcus sat with this for a moment. But Sandra, who had been doing this job for 16 years, and who had learned that the most important conversations weren't always the easiest ones, said something he didn't expect. I want you to understand something, she said. The problem yesterday was not that you didn't recognize her. The problem was that she gave you her name, her card, and her ID, and you still treated her differently than the man who checked in right after her. Marcus looked at the table. That's what this is about, Sandra said, not the money. Brendan's termination was processed by noon. The hotel's communications team drafted a statement by 2 o'clock. It went through 4 revisions before the general manager approved it. The final version acknowledged that a guest had been treated in a manner inconsistent with the hotel's values, that an internal review had been conducted, and that corrective action had been taken. It did not name Adaeze. It did not need to. By the time the statement was released, it had already been overtaken by the story itself. A reporter at the Toronto Star had made the connection by mid-morning. She had a source inside the hotel, she wouldn't say who, and she had spent 3 hours verifying what she'd been told before calling Rochelle for comment. Rochelle, who had handled media for Adaeze's company for 9 years, gave a statement that was 3 sentences long and contained exactly no emotion. Miss Nwosu visited the Pemberton Grand on Thursday afternoon and was asked to leave by hotel management without cause. She exercised her right to take her business elsewhere. She has no further comment at this time. The story ran at 4:30. By 6, it had been picked up by CBC. By 8, it was on the national news. The anchor who covered it that evening had a careful, measured tone, the kind that Canadian broadcasters cultivate specifically for stories that are uncomfortable to say out loud but important enough that they have to be said anyway. She described what had happened in the lobby of the Pemberton Grand. She named the hotel. She named Adaeze Nwosu. She showed her photograph, the professional one, from the Nwosu Capital Group website, the one where Adaeze is in a charcoal blazer, looking directly into the camera with an expression that contains, if you look at it long enough, the precise quality that the lobby of the Pemberton Grand had failed to account for. She showed the photograph for a long time. The comment section of the CBC article went to over 2,000 responses by midnight. Most of them were variations of the same thing, that a woman had walked into a hotel, given her name, given her card, given her ID, and been asked to leave anyway, and that the people who had asked her to leave had not recognized, until it was too late, who she was. Not in the financial sense, but in the more fundamental sense, the sense that matters before any of the rest of it. The call from the Pemberton Group CEO came at 10 the next morning. Adaeze was in her office on King Street, the one with the long window that looks north over the city, drinking the same black coffee she'd been drinking since 1998 and reviewing a term sheet that had nothing to do with any of this. Her assistant put the call through because she'd been told to. The CEO's name was Lawrence Whitfield. He was 61 years old, had built the Pemberton Group from 4 properties to 19, and was, in his own self-assessment, a reasonable man. He led with the apology. It was a good apology, direct, unhedged, without the passive construction that turns apologies into non-apologies. He said, "We failed you. I am sorry. This was wrong." Adaeze listened to the whole thing. Then she said, "I appreciate that, Lawrence." A pause. He had been expecting more. Most people, in his experience, wanted more. They wanted accountability laid out, consequences described, policies explained. They wanted the architecture of the remorse. Adaeze didn't want any of that. She had already had the conversation she needed to have. It had happened in the back seat of a car in the rain. In the 18 minutes, she waited for Rochelle to call her back. In the quiet that followed the decision she'd made when she walked out of that lobby without raising her voice. "What are you going to do differently?" she asked. Lawrence talked for several minutes about training programs, about review processes, about a diversity advisory panel he was going to commission. He was specific. He seemed sincere. Adaeze listened to all of it. "Good," she said when he was finished. "Make sure you do it." She didn't promise to bring the business back. She didn't say she would consider it. She said, "Make sure you do it," and then she said she had a meeting starting in 10 minutes. And she thanked him for calling. After she hung up, she sat for a moment at her desk. Outside the window, Toronto was doing what Toronto does in October. Gray sky, the last of the leaves, the specific quality of light that belongs only to this city in this season, which she had grown up watching from a different window, in a different neighborhood, in a house where the basement flooded every spring. She had built something in this city. She had built it from nothing, and she had built it with patience and stubbornness, and a precise, unrelenting refusal to let other people's assessments of her become her own. She had been underestimated in boardrooms, and in lobbies, and in offices, and on sidewalks, and every single time she had simply continued. That was the thing nobody in that lobby had understood. Not Marcus, not Brendan, not the man in the gray suit who sailed through check-in in 90 seconds without being asked for anything. The stillness they had read as smallness was not smallness. It had never been smallness. It was the particular composure of someone who had decided, a very long time ago, that she was not going to spend her energy on the wrong things. She picked up her coffee. She opened the term sheet. The morning kept going. 3 weeks later, a hospitality trade publication ran a long piece on bias in luxury hotel check-in practices. It was reported carefully and cited several incidents. The Pemberton Grand was not the only example, but it was the first one named, and it was the one people remembered. Adaeze Nwosu was not quoted in the piece. She hadn't agreed to be interviewed. She had said what she needed to say by saying nothing at all.